Professor Gudrun Dahl. I ran into you at the 2014 African Studies Association conference in Indianapolis, Indiana. What brings you here?
I was invited to a panel on the Oromo, and since I used to work on Borana issues a long time ago, but I have been cut off from the field, I was very happy to be able to re-establish my contacts with Oromo and Borana studies.
Very good. So if you could describe where you came from, where did you come to the conference from?
I am a professor at Stockholm University at the Department of Social Anthropology, and I wrote my thesis on the Waso Borana of Kenya.
So when did you first start studying the Borana Oromo? When did you start studying?
Yes, I wrote my thesis and I did my fieldwork in 1973, and I had as a tutor, my professor was Karl-Erik Knutsson, who had written his thesis on the Machagala, on the Kalu institution.
Okay, then the G word was pejorative, right, in the 1970s. So you're coming back to reconnect to Oromo studies after how many years of maybe break? Is that a break or
maybe a break of 20 years?
20 years. But were you still studying in those 20 years? Were you still doing some research or?
After having worked on the Borana, I did a field work on the Beja in Eastern Sudan. So I worked a little bit more on that, but I also wrote about different topics like Sweden's relation to Sweden's relations to nature, so to say, and our common property system in Sweden. And then I also wrote about development discourse. Then I was cut off from research because I was a dean, and that took too much time.
Right. So if you can talk about a little more about your life in the Borana Oromo community. Did you have an Oromo name? How did you like it? How was your relationship with the community that you studied?
Yeah, the people I studied were very, very friendly people, and I lived with people in Garbatula and in Kinna. Most of the Boranas in Isiolo district were then Muslims, and they were very friendly. I had a close relation to them and identified myself as Gudrun.
Gudrun, they called you Gudrun?
Yeah.
Okay,
or
so.
Har Galgallo, because I gave the name Galgallo to my oldest son. It's not his only name, of course.
So they call you Hadagalgalo too?
Yes.
Gudrun and Hadagalgalo. So the Swedish name is very close to the Oromo name Gudrun. Excellent. So, when you started in the 1970s, the Oromo studies did not flourish, and there was a lot of suppression from the Ethiopian government at the time, which was more hostile than today to anything Oromo related. What was your experience like, just entering this space that is contested? What was it like? Was it what did people say from non-Oromos, like say Amaharas or other people in government at the time? Did they try to discourage you from studying the Oromo?
No, of course, since I didn't go to southern Ethiopia, I had no problems with the Ethiopian government. But I remember when I traveled to Ethiopia in 1987, and I was taken on a tour from the university. When I saw, we came to a place where there was a kind of Oromo celebration, and I noted that my companions on the journey were extremely scared. I thought it was very dangerous to stop and talk to the Oromo.
Okay. So on the Kenyan side of the border, access was relatively
That was easy, actually.
better, right?
The problem there was that the people who were living there were very poor because they had suffered so much from the Shifta war.
Okay.
So of course they were not the government was not in favor of them, but on the other hand it was relatively peaceful, and it was possible to go to Garbatula without the army following you, but you had to be a bit careful with what you were saying and so on.
Yeah. Who were the army who were following you?
The army usually.
The army.
The
Okay.
army.
Was it the Kenyan or the Ethiopian army?
Yeah, it was the Kenyan army.
Okay.
I mean, they would accompany you later on. After that,
Yeah.
the conditions became worse, so you had to apply to be accompanied by the army to go there.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, when I was there, you could go freely between Isiolo and Garbatula.
Okay. So was the army like following you to provide protection or to monitor what you said?
I never had to be associated with them. I think they were following guests to Garbatula to protect and to check on them.
Oh, okay. So very.
Protection is always.
So it was a very positive thing.
Ambiguous.
Yeah, ambiguous, definitely. So talk about your work on the Oromo. Anything that your major publications, if you want to name them. Can you talk about your publications and research?
Yeah. First, my thesis was about subsistence and society among the Wasu-Borana. So it was about how a general equality between the Borana had been kind of changed by the introduction of monetary economy, and so people who had all the kind of insurance built on cooperation within society. Some of them, when they became rich, they started to invest in other things than cattle. They invested in the education of the sons and so on, and in political office. So I saw the beginnings of this, but I think it has developed in that direction later on. So there was less equality, less guarantees for equality between the Boran individuals than there had been before. Then later, when I came back in 1978, I made it was a kind of consultancy study for the International Livestock Center for Africa. And I don't know exactly what happened, but when we had finished, I wrote it together with Stephen Sanford, and when we had finished it, it was praised, and people said, "Oh, this is a very, very good report." And then suddenly they said, "But don't show it to anybody."
Why?
I'm not quite sure why. I think it was because we wrote about the Shifta war, and we also wrote about the need to kind of reconcile the Borana and Somali interests in northern Kenya. But we were not allowed to circulate it, but it was still circulated. So it became. I think it became the basis for a later development project that they had in a British project that they had in Isiolo.
Yeah. Who were the Shiftas? Did they have any identities? Where did they come from?
The Shiftas were Somalis who had voted for the independence of northern Kenya. There had been when Kenya was given independence from British, there had been a kind of popular referendum where the people of northern Kenya the majority had voted for succession, but the British didn't follow this suggestion. And the Borans of Isiolo district, many of them had sided with the Somali.
With the Shiftas.
They were called Shiftas, a kind of
Yeah.
a nickname, but the Somali people who wanted rather to join together with Somalia than to be part of Kenya. And then, of course, the Borana felt very much betrayed by many Somalis, because the Somalis were able to bring their stock over the Somali border and protect their stock from the Kenyan government.
Okay.
But the Borana were stuck with their animals in northern Kenya, and they lost a lot of stock to the Kenyan army, who slaughtered the camels of the Sakuya people.
Wow. So that impoverished the local population or something?
Yes. So they were, they became very, very poor, actually.
How long did the war run, though? Like, 'cause
I think it's, I don't remember now exactly,
Yeah.
2 or 3 years. And there were also complaints that they were put into dabas, that is some kind of concentration settlements, so they were not allowed to move as they wanted.
Right. So did the Shiftas fight the Borana, or?
No, the Shiftas fought against the Kenyan governments.
Okay, very, very, very interesting. I heard about it, but I didn't know the details of who the Shiftas were.
And the Borans were probably divided, because some Borans, the Borans of Marsabit were Christians, and rather few Borans were in Isiolo district were Muslims.
So, you said like you've been away for 20 years from Oromo studies. Definitely you work, if you started publishing in the 1970s, it's one of the pioneer early works on Oromo, and people need to understand that. What do you find, like, when you left, when you took a break, and then now when you're back, do you see any different development in Oromo studies? How do you assess, the Oromo studies over these decades?
One thing is that there are very many Boran and other Oromo scholars who write on their own culture, which didn't take place at that time. So after having finished my fieldwork, I wasn't able to go back to Kenya for personal reasons, because I was a single mother, so I had to stay at home looking after my children. But I worked together with Gamacho Magarsa on issues of the Gada system and issues of traditional Boran lore, the system of belief in Ayana, what did they mean with the Ayana, and all these issues have also become much more central focus of the, as I understand it, for the Oromo generally. So there is much more published on these issues now than there was when I was working on it.
How many of you were focusing on, like, Oromo at the time, like in the 70s? Do you remember the names?
Well, it was mainly. Well, I remember.
Especially the expatriates,
Yeah, I'm thinking of Paul Baxter, who was my external examiner, and John Hultin, who wrote about. I think he wrote about Arsi. I'm not quite sure. Or Macha, maybe. So I think there weren't more than perhaps 10 people. There were some female researchers who did work on the Orma at Tana River, and not so many actually. And one thing is that when I was